All right, part 3, question 6. It can be inferred from the passage that in the author's view, okay, the author's view, traditional detective fiction is characterized by what? Um, okay. So what we'd be looking for is things that are not uh, associated with PD James, right? Because PD James is like going against the grain in terms of detective fiction. So, concern for weaknesses and doubts of the characters. No, that's really more that character construction and um, uh, yeah, like the painstakingly constructed characters construction. And notions of morality, duty, pain, and pleasure. Yeah, that I wouldn't think is traditional detective fiction. Transparent devices to advance the plot. Um, advance the plot is good. Um, advance the plot is good. Transparent. I don't know about that. Let's just look at where the author talks about devices. Devices to advance the story. Shameless and thin. So this is like a negative, right? This is part of that negative section of the third paragraph. So this is a negative of PD James. So certainly there are devices to advance the plot in detective fiction. And plot is really key in detective fiction. But them being transparent isn't really a positive thing. And shameless and thin would be in that word cloud for transparent, actually, right? So it's all out in the open. You can think of, yeah, shameless as like just putting it all out in the open, whereas when you're shameful, you're hiding everything. And thin, right? Thin enough that you can see through it makes it transparent. So they're, maybe on the edge of that word cloud, but certainly still there. And those things are not really things that necessarily characterize detective fiction, right? The transparency of those devices. C, attribution of intuition to the detective. No, right? So the intuition thing, again, that's PD James, and PD James is against the grain rather than part of the core character of traditional detective fiction. The straightforward assignment of culpability for the crime. So the whodunit aspect. I would say yes. And we do have an example of her rebelling, right? So leaving ambiguity in the solution of the crime, right? And distributing guilt among these different characters rather than straightforwardly assigning culpability or guilt, responsibility. Again, culpability, you could have a word cloud for that. So doing that in a straightforward way, saying this is the guilty party, and we're going to, at the end of this story, we're going to figure out who did the crime. That's what the goal is. So that's something that she's rebelling against, and she's rebelling against the traditional neatness of detective fiction. So that is a traditional characteristic of detective fiction. Oh, if we go back, attention to those concepts, in like concepts is like, that's more of an abstract sense. And yeah, the notions of morality and duty, right? That's what that's referring to. And that's something PD James does that is not typical of detective fiction. The author characterizes the position of some critics as inverted snobbery because they hold wit to the following views. A, critics of literature must acknowledge that they are less talented than creators of literature. No, it's not between critics and creators. Critics should hesitate to disparage popular authors. No, that's not what's going on there. P.D. James's novels should focus less on characters from the English landed gentry. Too specific, definitely not part of it. Detective fiction should be content to remain an unambiguous literary genre. So this is interesting. Sorry, unambitious, right? Not unambiguous, yeah. Remain an unambitious literary genre. So yeah, ambition is trying to elevate, right? Trying to get higher in position. But what they're saying is that she is abandoning the conventions of detective fiction to go higher, to like a highbrow style. So their comment, why do they hold that? What's that view that they hold? Yeah, it's that she should stay in her genre, right? Be content to stay or remain her genre. Should be less fastidious about portraying violence. No, there isn't a mention of the portrayal of violence. Okay, last question. Which one of the following quotations about literature best exemplifies the familiar attitude mentioned in the second sentence of the passage? So that familiar attitude is perhaps underlying the debate is that familiar false opposition set up between different kinds of fiction. And this opposition is enjoyable novels are somehow slightly lowbrow, and it's not true literature unless it's a little bit dull. Okay. The fantasy and whimsy characteristic of this writer's novels qualify them as truly great works of literature. Fantasy and whimsy, I would associate that more with enjoyment. The greatest work of early English literature happens to be a highly humorous, enjoyable collection of tales. Nope. We're saying enjoyment is associated with lowbrow, and things being a bit more dull are associated with true literature. A truly great work of literature should place demands upon its readers rather than divert them. So it shouldn't be a distraction, but a demand, right? So we're not reading to escape life, but to be confronted by it in a way that, makes us think deeply. So that's much more in line with that attitude, but I'm going to keep going. Although many critics are condescending about best-selling novels, I would not wish to challenge the opinion of millions of readers. So this is suggesting that popularity is an indication of quality. And that's not the attitude, the familiar attitude mentioned. E, a novel need only satisfy the requirements of its particular genre to be considered a true work of literature. No, right? So genre fiction isn't considered high literature, according to that quote unquote familiar attitude. So C be the correct answer. All right, so I hope that analysis, that review is helpful. Please let me know if you'd like me to elaborate. But I think I went off on quite a few tangents there as it is. So hopefully I covered some ground that was relevant to you as well, and not just something that I, popped into my head. But yeah, I tried to kind of cover some ground that relates to like common issues that people have. Okay, have a good one.